Welcome to the AI Think Tank podcast, the future of intelligent systems, machine learning, and data science. I'm Dan Wilson, coming to you from Seattle, Washington. Today, we're diving into the hidden pitfalls of A/B testing with Sumit Gupta. As a business intelligence engineer at Notion and author of the book The Tableau Workshop, he has spent over 8 years building data-driven solutions that enhance business efficiency. With experience at Snowflake and beyond, Sumit specializes in marketing analytics, business intelligence, and modern data stacks. He has spoke at numerous industry events, judged hackathons, and continues to share practical insights on leveraging data for strategic growth. Welcome to the show, Sumit. How's it going?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Dan. It's great to be here. I am looking forward to this conversation.
Excellent. Yeah. So, hey, let's start it out with telling us a little bit more about your upbringing. I know that you're from India, and that really, shaped your approach to problem solving in data science to a large degree. Tell us about your upbringing.
So I was born in Dharavi. Just for viewers who are not aware of Dharavi, so Dharavi is like world's largest or biggest slum. Think of it like so in 2 miles radius, there are like a couple of millions people living there. So that's
Mhm.
how congested and how hard it is to just stay there, live there, right?
Right.
I was born there. I stayed there for like a better part of my early career, my early childhood. And what I realized, I think when I was like about 10 years old, I moved away. I moved out because my family decided, you know what, Dharavi is not the place to be if they were to take care of the children, right?
Right.
So decided to move out. But even before that, just the fact that I used to observe my family, I used to observe my dad, I used to observe my grandfather and how hard they actually struggle to make ends meet, right?
Mhm.
That gave me that instilled in a confidence or a belief in me that, there's no replacement for hard work, right?
Mhm.
And you have to do whatever it takes to like upscale and get the family out of that, let's say below middle class. In India, there's a term called middle class, which basically says like you're barely only making ends meet, right? So how do you get it out of that? So yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that's really tough. Um,
Mhm.
so, you went from engineering to data science and analytics through your career. I mean, tell us about what that journey was for you and like how you ended up here, really.
Yeah, so I did my like bachelor's in computer engineering. I graduated in 2014, and in my junior year, as I was exploring what are my next career steps, right? You could graduate, you could join as a software engineer in like one of the big tech companies like Accenture, Deloitte, and KPMG,
Oh yeah.
uh, or Infosys. And then I realized I don't want to be a software engineer out of the box. I don't want to be, whenever you think of the software engineer, you think of like a box, right? You are in a box, in a cubicle and just coding. There's no outside interaction. You get a requirement, you do your job. If you do your job well enough, you'll climb up the ladder, right? And I did
Mhm.
not want to be that because I'm generally more outgoing, per se, right? So I was like, okay, let's find a career where there's an intersection between technology as well as business. And
Mm.
that's when I stumbled upon information management or information systems in a lot of universities. And then I decided to apply for masters in USA. And back then, this is 2014, 2015, when in India, data science was still relatively new, right? So I was like, you know what, this course, like the course that I graduated in Syracuse, masters in information systems with a specialization in data science. I was like, this is exactly what I want because this gives me an ability to like code, program, or do tech stuff while
Hmm.
also meeting with stakeholders, right? Understanding
Yeah.
what do they want, right?
Mhm.
And being who I am, very receptive of talking to multiple people, multiple different cultures, understanding them and getting them on the same page. I'm like, that's something that I want to do. That's why I decided to like pursue my master's in US, graduating from Syracuse University in 2017.
Mhm.
And right out of the bat, like I got an internship in New York City for a company called Life Tiles. They are in the SharePoint web space. And there I had my first break in analytics. I was hired as a digital marketing analyst there. and worked for them for a year there.
Wow, that's a good transition. And yeah, really good points there too, not being in the box and having a lot more room to experiment and innovate, really, because I know that feeling. And so you wrote the Tableau Workshop. That's a pretty powerful book, and still revered today. So tell us about that. What inspired you to be a part of that and write that?
Yeah, so this is early COVID, like early like April 2020, May 2020. I've generally been very proactive on social media, be it LinkedIn or be it on Instagram.
Mhm.
And Pack Publishers, who are the publisher for Tableau Workshop, they reached out to me after reviewing some of my content online. I had written blog post on Tableau before. They reached out to me and they were like, "We are looking for a author who's Tableau expert, knows how to like write books which hooks people, right, and really understand what it takes to be a good writer, right? You can be a technology wizard, but if you can't really convey that in the right
Mhm.
format,
Right.
then you're not never
Yeah.
going to write a book,
Yeah, you've
right?
got to be able to tell a story with the data. Otherwise, there's nothing but numbers, and who cares? There's only a few fine points there. But yeah, you have to be able to communicate this to different audiences and drive the impact of the meaning behind the information, and bring that to the table. So I'm sure that influenced you as an author from there on out, like
Yeah.
a pretty big deal. So yeah, and that's a great tool as well. So I mean, you've worked across marketing and analytics, business intelligence, and data science, but what are some common threads across these domains that you feel like are really pivotal right now to understand?
Yeah, I think there's a certain shift from so I'll give you an example. So when I was graduating in 2017,
Hmm.
business analyst as a role still existed, right?
Right.
Companies used to hire business analysts a lot. Business analysts are like people who do project management work, do know how to use data, right? But
Hmm.
then I kind of knew that this is getting phased out because people are not going to need business analysts in future. They're either going to need technical or they'll have a specialized project manager or a project owner, right?
Yep.
And then eventually, at this point of time, with the whole AI boom, I think data analyst or BI engineer as a role might be getting phased out too, and that's where the new role, which is analytics engineering, comes into picture.
Okay.
Analytics engineering is like best of both worlds. You have to be an analyst. You also have to be a data engineer. You might not be best in the world in both, but you are like I like to think of it as like you're dangerous enough to make an impact.
Ah,
So
okay.
analytics engineer are that where you should know how to build a dashboard, but you should also know how to build an ETL pipeline using dbt, using Python,
Mhm. Yeah,
right? So
that's right.
that role is like I saw a job opening from OpenAI like a couple of weeks back. They are hiring for like a couple of analytics engineers. They don't hire for data analyst anymore, right?
Hmm. Right, right. Yeah, implementation is such a big deal, and it's the hard, tricky part for everybody, really. I mean, I know I feel this quite a bit, but into the A/B testing area of things here. I mean, you've worked with a lot of different experimentation platforms as well, and what and a lot of major platforms. So, what are some common mistakes that you see teams making with A/B testing? And, what are your insights with this? Because this can be a huge issue. And I've been lately studying a lot about this off the side as well. And I'm just like, okay, time to talk to an expert here. So, what are the common mistakes you're seeing these teams make?
Yeah. So based on my experience, there are so it's two parts to it. One, as an analyst or as a data scientist who's actually running the experiment. Another one is like executives' presence, right? How pressured executives are. So, as a data scientist, my job is to make sure that there's no biases, right?
Mhm.
You don't stop the test early, right? Because there are cases where you run a test and you're like, oh, in 2 days I'm not getting the results, and you stop the test early, but you're not letting the sample population run, right? You have to make sure if you decide when you're creating a test, let's say if you decide to run the test for 4 weeks, 1 week is your sample period in a way, right? You want to test the waters first, right? If it's working, if and you have guardrails for that. If the in 1 week, if the guardrails are broken, right? Let's say if you see the conversion rate, if it's at 2%, right, and your guardrail is 1.5%, in a week, if it goes below 1.5, right, then the test is having incredible negative impact. You want to be stopping that. Now,
Mhm.
if you have 10,000 visits, that's fine. But at Dropbox, when I used to do heavy A/B testing, we had millions of visits. Even a 0.5% move could cost us millions of dollars.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
right. And yeah, this is so important too because what you're doing, what you're saying here really underscores some really old systems theory values, which are if you're gonna do empirical testing, you have to see it through, or you're gonna waste so much time and resource. Because if you leave that empirical test on a hunch, right, and you start to use heuristic approach, you're you should have just not used any empirical approach and gone with all of your hunches at first because you're going to waste your time, you're going to waste other people's time and money and your job, depending. And so it's extremely important to maintain that uh the empirical approach, orderly and let it, like you said, let it play out and really understand because sometimes a problem will happen and it could happen for a multitude of reasons, maybe just a small handful, maybe even just two reasons. Okay. We don't know, something emerging that we find out. And if you don't use the empirical approach completely, you're going to miss any kind of fine points in there, any kind of nuances that you would probably never see in some heuristic approaches. And I have experience with both for heterogeneous digital analog systems, quite a bit, and robotic systems and sensor array units, things like that. And so I know for a fact that you have to really choose your path wisely and not intermingle it with just off, like write down your hunch, definitely, but come back to that later. Don't interrupt it. So, yeah, I really value your insight into that for sure. So let's say here, the contexts differ, all right, from different experiments. Okay, in A/B testing in marketing, what are you seeing in terms of, I guess, what would be a better, more thorough approach, I guess maybe even with SEO and marketing, I should say, with your A/B testing. I know I have to deal with this a lot personally, and really, it's personal though. I don't have to do this for a large company or anything, but
yeah.
uh,
So in marketing, right, specifically around SEO, if you think of SEO, it's not a typical A/B test generally. It's generally like pre-post test. Now,
mm,
what does that mean is, so when you think of A/B test, you're making a change to a web page or a website or a feature of product, right? Let's say a button example, the simplest of example, a green button and a red button, right? You're
mhm,
making, you are splitting that change, let's say 50-50 to like two set of users. But in SEO, you cannot do that because Google, the search engine, any search engine does not want two versions of the same page
mhm,
because the canonical URL issue pops up. If you create two versions of the same page and show like different versions to two sets of users,
mhm.
Google's gonna Google's gonna ban you because Google thinks that, oh, you are trying to duplicate the content, and Google does not like that.
Oh yeah,
So
that's
in that
right.
case, generally do like pre-post. The way pre-post works, especially in SEO, is you identify a set of pages which have the similar like traffic trends, right? Similar conversion rate. You use some sort of algorithm, right? I used to use clustering algorithm, right, to
Okay.
identify those pages which are like similar and cluster them together, right? Identify, let's say, set of 20 pages. You make changes if you want to, let's say, test content on that page. You make changes to like 10 of the pages and have a sample of 10 pages where there's no changes happening.
Mhm,
And once you make those changes, you're noticing, is the average ranking for those pages improving or decreasing? Is
mhm.
the average conversion rate for those pages improving or decreasing? As the average visits per day increasing or decreasing? Right.
I
In
see.
that sense, you're doing pre-post. What was pre the experiment? What is post the experiment with a sample pages?
Mhm.
So that's
So yeah, yeah. So like, let's say, have you done experiments with hashtags where, you're testing things like that, or do you find that to be significant still? Do you find that maxing out using as many hashtags as you could for similar content, does that make a difference? What's some real life case studies for this?
Yeah. So I am also a social, like I have Instagram page, right? Data by Sumit has like
Mhm.
26,000 followers. And in my observation, I think hashtags are great to a limit. Let's say if you have like 50 hashtags,
Mhm.
Instagram algorithm is going to assume that you're spamming just for the sake of doing
Ah,
it.
Right, right.
As if we have like contextual hashtag of let's say 4 or 5 hashtag, that's an ideal number that I've observed. Where if you don't go above 5, you are
Hmm.
good. But as soon as you go like 10 or 12,
Hmm.
Instagram thinks that you're just trying to trick the algorithm in a way which you are, right? The
Yeah.
reason we use hashtag is because they are trying to trick the algorithm in creating that contextual information or contextual knowledge graph. That's how these social media websites work, right? There's a knowledge graph, and they are trying to connect the dots and create a view for end users.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. That's really insightful there. It's really good to know. Some shows I do have a lot of different content in them, and so I end up pushing it a little bit, but I'm not trying to overseed it with hashtags. That's nice to know. So how does the approach for experimentation and A/B testing differ between startups and established tech companies? Based on your experience and in both environments, what have you seen work, and what are the again pitfalls for startups to watch out for?
Yeah, so I'll give you I'll give you example from Dropbox, right? When you're at startup, right, the number
Hmm.
of people doing experimentation is limited. Let's say 2 or 3 people, and generally they are part of the same team. Let's say a growth team, right? And when that's the case, you know when let's say experiment one is running versus experiment two is running, and what is the surface area for those experiments,
Hmm.
especially if you're testing on web, right? When I say surface area, the number of pages. Whereas when it's a bigger company, so at Dropbox we also had like a different product experimentation team. There was web experimentation team, and if you think about it, Dropbox as a product also exists on the web, right? There's an app, obviously. So a lot of times in company as big as Dropbox, there was a lot of conflict of experiment. What does that mean? You run a test, right, as a silo, right? You're like, okay, this is the set of pages where I'm running the test, pre, post, etc. And then without knowing, another analyst or another data scientist runs a similar test on the same set of pages, right? And then you're like, why is the metrics messing up, right? Why doesn't it make sense? It should not be, even with guardrails, it's messing the numbers.
Mm.
And then after 4 weeks, you're like, oh, another data scientist actually ran a different experiment, but on the same page.
Ah.
So it creates that conflict. So that's the major difference between like startups versus like established companies. Uh, like experimentation as a whole, right? Is such that you want silos, you want your data scientists to be confident of launching experiments, but
Yeah.
then that information or that experiment directory needs to be shared across the company, which
Yes.
initially at Dropbox we did not do that. And once I realized that that this is happening, we started creating like surface areas that I'm going to be touching over next 4 weeks. So make sure that there's no other experiments that are running on these pages, etc.
Ah, I see. Yeah, that's some real orchestration right there for testing, especially when it's live, and half of it is being worked on. So,
And
let's talk about attribution modeling and how that intersects with experimentation and what challenges arise when trying to align all these methodologies.
yeah, no, I mean with attribution, right? I'm assuming you're talking about multi-touch attribution in terms of like marketing, right? First touch, last
Mhm.
touch.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, with attribution, so the way I think of attribution is like, let's say if director of demand gen has $1 million to spend, right, on paid ads, let's say LinkedIn ads and Google search ads. If she or he does not know how those $1 million are converting into what business, right? Let's say if you're going to use last touch attribution, right? They want to know what was the last touch before the conversion happened, right?
Mm.
And let's say if they're spending $1 million, they want to know what was the last touch attributed revenue that was generated. Let's say $2 million. So the
Mm.
ROAS, return on ad spend, is 2x, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and the reason attribution comes into picture here is like when you're launching these experiments, you want to be knowing the whole customer journey. What was the last touch? What experiment they saw, and how did they convert? Once
Mm.
you have that whole contextual like view of a customer journey, then you can start taking actions in future about, okay, should I be spending like out of $1 million, should I be spending let's say 600,000 on LinkedIn with let's say evergreen content, right?
Mhm.
That's working great. Can I upscale that to like $1 million on LinkedIn versus like spending somewhere else, right? Just the fact that you get context using experiments, and with attribution, you know where the actual conversion is happening.
Yeah.
And obviously, there are other types of attribution too that we used to use at Dropbox: first touch, linear touch. If linear touch is, if you want to be giving credits to each touches before the conversion happened, let's say if I'm going to Dropbox and signing up for the paid plan, but this is the 10th time I'm visiting Dropbox before signing up. Dropbox will calculate, let's say, if I spend $100, Dropbox will give $10 credit to each of the touches, and are attributed appropriately. Whereas in last touch, whatever my last touch, let's say I saw LinkedIn ads, clicked on it, and then signed up. Although I've been on Dropbox site before, that LinkedIn ads gets like $100 attribution.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that that's an extremely important data point for marketing team. Marketing teams generally without attribution model doesn't really function well in my experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. So how should people approach the disconnect between short-term experimental results and long-term business impact? Because, again, it's not all companies are going to have the foresight for some of these things, depending on the territory they're navigating,
Yeah, I think when I think of experiments, right, and when we are launching experiments, uh, I generally tag each of my experiments as like, is it gonna benefit me short term, or is it
Mhm.
gonna long term, right? In terms
Right.
of SEO, it's generally long term because SEO is a long term game. You never run SEO experiments for like 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and six weeks, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in terms of like general A/B testing on a product based testing, like if I'm launching a feature or a product, right, and if I want to be testing, that's a short term experiment that I'm running.
Mhm.
Like I want the instant impact, right?
Yeah.
And even before I tag an experiment as short term or long term, I have the guardrails too for those experiments, right?
Mhm.
Because if I drop the conversion by half a point, right, my manager is going to be pissed, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if the upside of short term results are great, but
Mhm.
the downside is bothering me, okay? So there's that fine balance between short term results going crazy, like aggressive in your testing, and then
Yeah.
hoping that it might work out, but then you also have to be ready for the downside.
Right, right. This happened to me and some other cohorts at MIT that when we were working on our bots on OpenAI and we were doing various API function calls and things like that, and they would A/B test us when we least expected it. And we're like, our app's broke, and then I had a lot of other things happen to me I won't get into, but you find out that your reliance on outside sources can be very dangerous sometimes, or how people could, test and you find out maybe that wasn't the best way to do that, guys. And now they give you a side-by-side box on OpenAI's Chat GPT will show you these things. But it was a wild west for a minute there. And I feel like it takes having some flexibility to really, you have to try some things. Not everything's going to work, like I said, there's new territory to navigate. So, how would you leverage, let's say, like different data tools in your tech stack to ensure that kind of robust analysis occurs? You know, what
Yeah,
what what are your, really good, like, just off the utility belt solutions for that?
yeah. I think I don't know if you have heard the term, the whole modern data stack, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just for the viewers also, right? For
Mhm.
context, modern data stacks is basically taking open source or non-open source tools, combining all those tools so that you could get data from, let's say, point A to point B. In this case, let's say if you're getting data from Salesforce, how do you get Salesforce data into your data warehouse as quickly as possible? In the companies that I have worked with, Dropbox, Snowflake, and Notion, like generally, the modern data stack looks like some sort of like Fivetran or an open source version of called Airbyte, right? That's all they Fivetran and Airbyte generally have connectors, which allows you to quickly take the data from, let's say, a third party tool, in this case, Salesforce, and
Yeah.
land it in your destination, which could be any data warehousing tool like Snowflake, Google Cloud, like BigQuery, or even Redshift, right? Uh,
Hmm.
and then once it lands, it's raw data. How do you transform that? Because raw experiment data is great, but it's of no use to me right out of the bat. So
Yeah.
I need some transformation. I need to do the cleaning. I need to make sure that the data is ready for reporting and experiment results. Right.
Uh-huh.
That's when tools like DBT or data build tool comes into picture. because with DBT, the whole DBT revolutionized the whole like creating SQL models and versioning it. Because far too often I had realized, or the companies have realized, that if an analyst creates a table, it's in silo. And if a different analyst wants to touch the same table and update a column, they'll update it without any versioning, without anyone knowing why that happened. Right. That's why GPT versioning actually comes into picture. You have a paper trail of what changes happened and why and when, because analysts are supposed to like mention in the PR, right, why you are making those changes, right? And once those transformation happens, it's all about then using tools like Statsig and Optimizely for running your A/B test, right? Like once those tests are run, once you run those tests, once you have the data, then you go ahead and create your own experiment results, right?
Right.
And with this whole modern data stack, you don't technically or previously you would involve a data engineer to get the data to you, right? And that would take 4 to 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or even 12 weeks at times to get the data because they are generally slammed, right?
Huh.
But with the modern data stack, you completely like you can do the job without their help, right? And get to experiment results faster.
I see. So yeah, that's super important. So in light of all that, understanding and not just telling the story with the data, but really the choice and visualization to help people understand these experiments. I mean, so what's the challenge that you encounter when teaching people about choosing the right way to visualize data and to be effective with communicating it? What is the big challenge here at this point?
Yeah, I think when you work with stakeholders, it's also important to generally to know what sort of visualization they like, right?
Hmm.
You can come up with like 100,000 different visualization, right? Could be as technical as, Bayesian analysis with all the formulas up on the screen, right? Or
Hmm.
could be as simple as a bar chart. So there's a fine balance between knowing what your stakeholders actually understands. Not everyone is very data driven.
Right.
Not everyone is a data scientist, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
finding that balance is important. And I think like in pre-post analysis, right? The way I used to showcase the experiment results would be like if we like line chart, right? And there'll be like two lines, right? With an experiment date where you would see if we did not run this experiment, this is the graph we'll see. Because
Mhm.
of the because of the experiment we ran, we are seeing a higher uptick, right? So they can easily quantify those that, oh, if Sumit did not run this experiment, we would expect 100,000 visits a year. But because of this experiment, now we are expecting 120,000 visits a year.
Mhm.
Just the fact that a simple yet very calculative visualization, which actually everyone can understand, is critical in conveying your message to the stakeholders and getting their buy-in for like not just this experiment but also future experiments.
Right. Yeah, that's super important. I can imagine that being a lot for someone to navigate that's learning, their territory, learning that area. So, let's see here. So what are some special considerations to make when, let's say, testing email campaigns, like compared to like a website experience? Because I have a lot of this coming to me personally. And so what are you seeing here?
Yeah,
What considerations should teams make on this?
yeah. So I think email experiments differ from website A/B testing due to like limited user interaction. With
Hmm.
emails, you create an email, you send it out, right? And there's no way to change it, right? Whereas
Right.
with the website, once you launch an experiment, if you think something's not working or something needs to change, you generally have a lot more control because website as a surface area, you control that.
Hmm.
Email as a surface area or as a channel, once it's out of your system, it's out of your system. There's not much that you can do. And with email, generally, like I can think of like 4 or 5 things that you could test. You could test subject line, you could test header image, you could test like call to action in the email, you could test the content in the email,
Hmm.
and maybe you could, if you are fancy enough, you could test like different names, right? But with website, there you have unlimited customization option. You could
Right.
test everything. You could test footer link, header link, call to action button, logo changes, etc., right? So that's how like email as well as website testing differs. um, with email, like with website, you're actually in a way tracking near real time data, right? You
Mhm.
are seeing
Yeah,
what people are doing on the website. With
absolutely.
with email, it's like you run the experiment and you're hoping it goes on well. And that is one of the reasons. I don't know if you know, but a lot of companies before running the test, let's say for a large user base, let's say a million email, they'll run the test for, let's say, 10,000 people first. And they don't even do it manually. Like Marketo is one of the tools that does it really well, where they'll create like a pilot test where
Yeah.
they'll do A/B test for like 10,000 people, right?
Mhm.
Or like 10% of the population, and of those 10%, they would then eventually realize, okay, version B is working better than version A. They'll automatically send version B to the rest of the 90% of the population, right?
Mm. Mhm.
So a lot
Right.
of sophisticated tools like Marketo actually do that for you.
Yeah. So, okay. So, for all the companies out there that are getting into this for themselves and need this, and in general for people, what are the skills and mindsets that you would look for in candidates to be working with experimentation teams for these efforts? I mean, uh, from groups of consultants to, hiring in, like, what are the types of people you're looking for this?
Yeah, I think based on my experience, a strong like experimentation team needs a balance between technical as well as strategic folks.
Hmm.
Experimentation is one of those fields where you could be a statistical wizard, right? You
Okay.
could be the best in the world. But if you're not able to convey that strategic value or impact to your stakeholders, that experiment is of really no use, right?
Hmm.
Fine
Hmm.
balance between being a tech statistic wizard or a machine learning wizard
Hmm.
and working with stakeholders and identifying, oh, what are the most impactful thing I could be doing. You could be running 10,000 experiments in a year if you wanted to, right?
That's
That's what
great.
my team does. But how do you identify that 20% effort gives you 80% impact, like the Pareto rule, right? You have to work with your stakeholders. You have to be strategic enough to actually know and see,
Hmm.
to like peel the onion layers and be like, okay, this is the experiment that's gonna create impact for me, right?
Hmm.
Launch test is like it's not easy, but it used to be a lot harder 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Nowadays, like companies like StatSig and the others, right? You could launch experiments in a day or so, right? And then as an experimentation analyst or data scientist, you should also be well aware of not just stats and strategic thinking, but you should be a data consumer yourself also.
Yes.
You should
Hmm.
know where the data is coming from, what the pipeline looks like.
Yeah.
Am I getting the right data? If not, how do you convey that to your technical stakeholder like data engineers? All right.
Right. Right.
The right
Exactly.
the right mindset is crucial.
Uh-huh. So I've, and we've talked a bit outside of this show before, and I don't know if I've told you this or not, but I came up as what I would consider more of a physical data scientist back in the early 2000s. And when I say this, I mean digital device storage devices, and by the many tens of thousands would come in, and we would add value to those chips, and print, package different software for people on them, but in the course of doing this, I had to, qualify media in the orders of, up to 100,000 sticks sometimes. Okay. And a lot of the testing that I did was literally running everything through what's called H1 tests, where it would actually write the entire stick and come back, H1, H3, H5 tests for different versions of it. And then I would do post-op on them and actually take devices apart and record particular numbers and things where things didn't line up. And we would never really switch media on someone. We would have to qualify it for them. But sometimes the factories would A/B test us, right? And so we'd have to watch out for that. And so I was a digital forensic specialist of many different degrees, from like crime to, data rescue to creating new file systems to breaking standards to make new projects happen and possible. And so I have dealt with the pains of this in a physical form that's really something you end up passing down to the customer and their end users, right? So there's so many levels of consideration to make, because you're going to have to support something downstream that could be actually related to medical devices, which I've had to do, where it's live, it works right there with a medical device, and that thing must function to right. And people will tell you all sorts of things and not understand. The people that sell you solutions and products might not understand. And so I feel like it's really important when you do get a team that everyone's aligned with the due diligence of kicking apart whatever it is and really really dissecting it to understand okay, here's the limits of this, and here's the real test bounds. Here's what we can and cannot do. And because of the critical nature and the very confidential nature of the things that I had to work with, you really had to get it right. You only had one chance, right? So that makes me think of the email campaign. You send it down, there's nothing you can do about it at that point, right? Unless unfortunately it comes back to you, for some reason or another. And then you have to deal with that and support it. But I thought I'd add that in there because there's a lot of power behind what you're saying because it can be more critical than you realize sometimes. And new information and new results will emerge. And whether you can tell that to the suppliers, the vendors, the manufacturers, your stakeholders, clients, their end users, man, it's vast. And so I have a lot of respect for taking the proper empirical approaches in the beginning, as well as I feel like it's good to have a team of hackers and people who are really just come up with wild ideas and can see something. All right, go ahead and go down that path and see what you find. That's how I've caught criminals. Okay, this is how I've had a great success record going forward from 2004 to currently. So I have really appreciate your insights on this. So let's see. So emerging trends and new tools. Right now, there is so much out. Okay. I use several different models I have a lot of models at home that I use locally in AI, and I'm doing A/B testing with lots of different things in an arena format for prompting, tons of stuff, functionality, bot testing, all this. But there are a lot of avenues of, generating, artificial data to, produce more results to train on, different things like that. And so I have a big question here for my audience, which is how do you see AI and machine learning changing the approach to A/B testing in the coming years? From what you know about now and what maybe you think it might be doing, what are you seeing here?
Yeah. So when you think of A/B testing, right, one of the most important first step that you take is like coming up with hypothesis,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
Now AI, right? Assume let's say OpenAI or any Claude, right? If you have those LLMs on your data, not like the public ones, right? Like
Right.
enterprise AI, right?
Yeah.
You could be asking them question and asking for ideas of hypothesis, right? Coming up with this hypothesis because in my experience, if your hypothesis is wrong, your experiment is going to always be wrong, right?
Right.
You
Right.
could think of AI assisting in coming up with ideas,
Hmm.
coming up with hypotheses, and hopefully quickly validating if this hypothesis really makes sense or not, right?
Hmm.
It
Right.
might that AI might not have access to the full data set, but it generally has access to the knowledge graph in a way, like all the documents, all the Dropbox documents, all the Notion documents, etc. Right?
Hmm.
It can
Right.
analyze. Has Sumit ran an experiment, or has anyone else ran an experiment, similar experiment before, and then come up with an hypothesis. AI. Why do we love AI? The reason we love AI is because its innate ability to like combine everything in one place and give us a summary or give us what
Yeah.
we are looking for.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Right?
and
But
adapt to the data. Also, that's something that I have seen be a real miracle worker. Is it's just its ability to adapt. And I built an agent. I had a really great agent system back in 2023. It was amazing, and it coded things for me, and it gave me beyond what I had ever seen before. And that's another story entirely. But I have a lot of experience with this level of automation and actually getting things done where my agents, and I build them locally from scratch too, but I've built them otherwise as well on different platforms. But the ones I built from scratch and the other ones, and what they have in common is the ability to write and execute their own code on a whim to get a problem solved. And so it might be, pre-process some data and then do something with that and then insert it with JSON and then now we're going to get to it. It may be a few steps between point A and point B, it might be really like point A and point E you're trying to get to and you need to do a few things, but I see what you're saying and I love that because you can establish these test parameters and ideas and hierarchies pretty rapidly using AI. And again, even using small models, the largest models that I use are 12 billion parameters or 15 billion on my home computer. Okay. And I only have a 12 gigabyte NVIDIA card. Okay. It runs really well. And I know I could do better, of course, but even the smaller models do a great job of this and
Mhm.
coming up with what's necessary. So, would you ever consider, and I don't know how deep you are in some of this, but would you ever consider fine-tuning an open model to help be more of a formidable A/B tester? Or do you find that perhaps just the normal foundation models are enough on their own without any specialization? Because I like low compute. I like fast, effective, very economical compute solutions, especially when
Mhm.
you're dealing with millions, maybe billions of entries for something on the big data end of things. So do you have any thoughts on that or is it?
No, I would love to train my own model, right?
Mhm.
But the challenge comes in when you're trying to move fast with your own
Mhm.
model, right?
Yeah.
I could be taking a couple of months, 3 months to like if I dedicate my time and train that model with all the data, etc. Right?
Mhm.
Whereas, let's say if I was to take a company like StatSig, who's actually doing really great, right? Using LLMs and AIs and coming up with like very complicated multi-armed bandits test, better randomization, right? They have
Mhm.
a team of 50 people actually working on that, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have
If
to have a lot.
if
Yeah.
if the question was, do I spend 3 of month like a quarter of a year trying to like make my model better? Was
Mhm.
it something off the shelf and get it done in 1/100th of a cost and more faster, right?
Mhm.
So I would probably prefer that because most companies don't give you 3 months or 6 months to actually do or
Mhm.
create an
Right.
uh,
Yeah. It's
model deployment. Plus, but I know for a fact that as AI, I mean, back in 2023, what was AI? Hardly anything. Now in 2025, AI is ready to take like entry level software engineers job, right? So
yeah.
in couple of years, I think like creating your own like fine tuned model wouldn't take that much of a time because with the whole enterprise AI, right, like Notion AI, right, it's an
Mhm.
enterprise AI. It has access to everything in your company now, right?
Right.
And
Right.
if you, eventually it will reach a point where you feed the data and they'll come up with their own, like, they'll
Mhm.
automatically get fine tuned. You don't have to like sit down and give it custom instructions every time, right?
Yeah.
So that ability of LLM and that hump of how to take that LLM over an enterprise AI edge is what's going to make AI fun.
Right. Yeah, I love hearing this so much. So you said Notion AI. What, if I may ask, what model or does Notion use on the back end to do this? Or is it
I
a multitude of
don't know
models?
exactly because I don't work with that team,
I
but
gotcha.
I think it's a custom model that they have trained, right?
Good.
Because
Yeah.
yeah. I don't think so. It's yeah. I obviously don't represent Notion here. It is this is my personal opinion, but
Mhm.
I wouldn't know the exact details.
Yeah, yeah, but it's secure, and it's what's important for people to understand is the endpoint security and the fact that it's not OpenAI doing what it's done in the past to snoop on people and take information. So,
Oh, Notion
yeah.
AI, like, we use Notion AI pretty much daily. Our Notion AI has access to all our Slack messages, Slack chat, our Jira.
Right.
I mean, it's easy to just go to Notion AI and be like, I have question about this KPI. What's the definition of this KPI changed? And Notion AI actually goes to the whole Notion doc that we have, goes through Slack messages, like public messages or in channels, right? Goes through
Mhm.
Jira Tracker or any of the ticketing system that we have and gives me responses that okay the let's say a definition of MQL, right? Oh, the definition of a marketing qualified lead was changed 2 months ago, and here's the context about that, why that happened, and here's a Slack link.
Uh-huh. Okay. So it creates the citation links the whole way down. It is like a receipt of where it's getting the information from. It's able to check across different corpus of data in terms of platforms. That's
Yeah.
really powerful. I love that. So, I say, not really, when I was saying earlier about building a model or, fine tuning a model, as really what I've been approaching is taking the tools that you like to use software wise and fine tuning the model locally, like a small model, 8 GB, whatever. And I fine tune that to have extra code ability to integrate into the exact applications the exact way I want to. So it's part of its living corpus. It never leaves the context window. It never has to really be a part of it the same way. as long as those neural networks are activated, essentially. But that really excites me to hear what you guys are pulling off at Notion. And I know that I haven't used it as much as I should. And lately, I've been brought into some other teams where I am using it, so that's great. So throughout your whole career and your journey, and what's the most significant, learning experience about data science and experimentation that you've come across? What project or what experience has really brought you into the fold of greater things for what's going on now?
Yeah, I think back in 2022, when the whole like cookieless world was coming into like reality with the whole Apple thing, right? Where they're like, we're not going to allow you to keep tracking users, right? No more cookies, right? That was
Yeah.
the biggest impact that I saw, because now you weren't really depending on cookies anymore. You had to come
Mhm.
up with like better solution of using first party data, right? Generally, you would depend on third party data, get the cookie, and you track the user end to end. With first party data, you have to change your approach, right? Because you can only do what you are capturing. You don't depend on Facebook to like launch the campaign for you, or target the users, right? And what that meant was we capture the data first, and then eventually, let's say if we feed that data into Facebook or LinkedIn, right? And
Mhm.
train their model in a way, right? Okay, this is the ideal customer we are looking for. Help me find those customers,
Yeah.
right? Uh,
Yeah.
and when you think of that, like it's a major shift from generally what was before. You could
Mhm.
track it via cookie. That's not possible now. So the impact and that creativity, right, allowed me to showcase more impact, like be on
Mhm.
top of my game, and launch experiments which weren't really dependent on cookies anymore.
Right. It's like I would like to see an internet that's more friendly for AI agents and bots. And, back in the, what was it, late 90s, early 2000s, web spiders, man, crawlers, and you would get around and, it could really hurt someone's website traffic if you weren't, being conscientious and, proper about those kind of requests. And
I remember
nowadays it's,
Python.
yeah,
Python was one of the tools that we could use, and like just go through their requirements.txt and those kind of things.
right. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of new implementations coming out right now, in fact, to help make the web more friendly for things like this. Like it's a BAML, and it doesn't stand for what it used to. It's a different BAML markup language, but I'm seeing a lot of people work with the glue of things to really try to, make things a lot more conducive and fluid between platforms and intercommunications. I mean, we're all really blessed to have the JSON, okay, and what we're able to pull off with that natively through function calling and AIs and across different models. It's great. And As a developer myself and someone who has to build websites and different functionality for things that I'm doing and lots of different integrations, I can't help but feel like, wow, what could we do to make this easier? Because scraping the web is, there's an art and science to it at this point, but it's still there's just still so many things to consider. And in my mind, like getting away from high end compute is really the answer because you don't want to just, it's like using a jackhammer when you just need a small hammer, right? And it's just so much money, down the drain when you have millions of users, using something on a company's site or what have you. So, all right, that could be its own show. All right, but I'll say this. I'll go ahead and get with some other questions that I've been fielded, which are, what are some resources that you would recommend to people who want to improve their A/B testing practice in general? What would be
Yeah,
those resources?
yeah. I think this is a great guy known as Ronnie Kohavi.
Hmm.
I can give his LinkedIn. So he used to run experimentation for Microsoft before. Then
Okay.
he became resident experimentation head of like Airbnb, and he
Hmm.
has a book called let me get you the name. Ronnie
Yeah.
Kohavi. Yeah. Yeah, so his book is called Trustworthy Online Controlled Experiments. Let me drop the link here.
Yeah, do that. Sure.
So, amazing book.
Hmm.
Takes you through like basics of A/B testing all the way to like extremely complicated, and how do you launch experiments for like billion users, right? Uh,
Hmm.
and when you think of like Ronnie, if you have like go through his LinkedIn, I'm
Hmm.
like you think of his career and how he has grown to the point where it's like he's leading BNB or a Microsoft experimentation. He
Mhm.
knows what he's doing, right? And if you get to learn from him, he also has courses, etc. But I think if you are getting started, like, or if you not getting started, but if you have like a couple of years of experience and you want to upskill, right?
Mm.
This is what to read.
Right. Wow.
And one more thing, like if you want to improve your visualization for experiments or general like storytelling, there's this book called Storytelling with Data by Cole. She used to work. She was head of data visualization at Google, right?
Oh
What
yeah. Yeah. Okay. I know about this book. Yeah. Yeah, it's great.
I actually credit my career upskilling and growth over the past 5 years to that book. Because after
Nice.
reading that book, my storytelling ability, my visualization skyrocketed. I used to be like a general, like, here's a chart and, be with it. Nowadays, it's like, how do you use color, fonts, and white space to actually show impact, right? And
Mhm.
this is that book actually. It tells you how to do that.
Right. I love that. Yeah. So, wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. You've been a great resource for a lot of people out there, just in what you briefly shared with us today. I'm quite sure. And in closing here, if you could give just one piece of advice to everyone out there and the organizations that are looking to really level up their experimentation practices with A/B testing, what would it be? What would be that really great bit of insight to leave everybody with?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. From my experience, I think if you are an executive, right,
Hmm.
get that buy-in, right, to your experimentation or growth team is extremely important. Experimentation generally wouldn't like yield results right away, but
Hmm.
be patient with them, right? That's the executive side of it. If you're an experimentation team or a data scientist, don't don't try to launch 50 experiments a quarter, right? 5 experiments are better than 50. Try to find those most impactful one. Work with your stakeholders, identify the what are their needs, how can you move the needle, right? The way I like to think is like you should be revenue generator, not revenue supporter. You could be revenue supporter, right? But if you want to grow in your career or make impact, your job is to identify those low hanging fruits for revenue generation.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
As long as
definitely.
you're part of the revenue generation team, right? It need not be like sales, marketing, or revenue operations. Revenue
Hmm.
generation is a broader term. You could be in product, you could be in product growth, and yet impact revenue generation. So as long as you are a revenue generator, your impact will be felt across the board.
Hmm. Gotcha. Wow. Yeah, that's a really good point. You do want to identify all the low-hanging fruit as quickly as possible before some other body does before you do, and it affects your world. You never know, right? So I've seen this happen. Uh, anyways, no, that's fantastic advice and a really good point there. Wow. Look, I tell you what, let's wrap it up here. I know that you've got a busy day ahead of you here, and we all would like to get on our weekends. So let's see. You're, do you plan on writing any more books coming up here? Or are you going to wait a while and see how things go with everything in AI and the industry to maybe approach that angle a little bit more? Or what are you feeling right now?
Yeah. So I do have a couple of things planned. So I want to be writing another book, but the book is going to be focused on modern data stack, right? Because I
Ah,
don't think so there's a unified book or a course right now in the market where it takes you from, oh, how do you use, let's say, Airbite or Fivetran, right? Why do you even use them? To all the way to like creating your own dashboards and storytelling and making impact, right? So
mhm.
it would be a very hands-on resource. I'm not sure if I want to do a book or a course. That's something that I'm still deciding. And
Right.
there is a huge element of AI in that because I think I've been using AI. AI has like increased my productivity by 4x already, right? But then I also started recently realizing that, but AI is also making me dumber, right?
Hmm.
Because losing my ability to like think through a problem, right?
Hmm. Right.
So I wanna capture that essence also in my book. How do you use AI to your benefit and not to your boon, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's so much, it's just like in the beginning of, actually about 2 years ago, people were wanting to use it for everything, and of course it's new and shiny and awesome and can do a lot. So, but then again, it does unexpected things. We live in a world where we don't need AI to do this, what we're doing. We have to live in a world. There's already enough uncertainty as it is. And so a lot of people who wanted to automatically, implement a lot of automation would find themselves spending twice as much time verifying the validity of the data and the output. And is this true? And oh, it just sounds convincing, but it's not true. The pitfalls are way bigger than they used to be, I feel like, because of this. And when you have to already cautiously approach these projects. You can't just roll the dice on. I mean, you might be able to say, "Oh, let's roll the dice on a few levels of approach," sure, but everything around it needs to be completely sound. And cleaning your data and understanding your data, that's brain work, and you have to be involved at that level. And then I have found that automating the redundancy helps and get everything in place for me to review and double check and triple check. And so that's how I tend to use AI as an assistant where I am the executive every step of the way and cross-checking everything. So, hey, we all use it for different things, different levels of research, deployments. And it's just important to take it with a grain of salt and to look at it like a junior developer. It's what it is. And no matter how profound it may be at times, and no matter how many times you do strike gold with it, and then that is legit, um, you're still rolling the dice to a degree. It's a probabilistic system. This is not deterministic. It's probability. It's Bayesian inference. It is association. So, anyways, look, Summit, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. It's been truly enlightening. You answered a lot of my personal questions to a T, and you've given me some ideas too. And I hope it really gave a lot of people out there some insight and guidance for what's coming and what they can do next with their teams and hiring those individuals. So thank you so much, Summit. I look forward to having you on again and us talking about some other angles of a lot of this too as well. So have a wonderful day. And again, everybody, Sumit Gupta, my name is Dan Wilson. This is the AI Think Tank podcast. Thank you so much.